The forest was pitch black, with only the crackling fire throwing faint, jumping shadows across our little campsite. I sat huddled close with Jake, Emily, and Sarah, all of us nervously laughing to keep the growing unease at bay. It was supposed to be just another fun camping trip, but now that we were out here, miles from civilization, every little sound in the darkness felt amplified or eerie. And then we heard it. A twig snapping somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the firelight. We all went silent, listening. Just when I was about to chalk it up to an animal or the wind, there was another sound. A rustling, just a bit closer this time. I could feel my heart starting to pound. The fire wasn't much of a comfort now. It only lit up a small circle, and out there, in the blackness, anything could be lurking. Jake stood up suddenly, grabbing his flashlight. "I'll check it out." "Probably nothing," he said, but I noticed he was gripping the flashlight way too tightly. He aimed the light toward the trees, and I held my breath, half expecting some animal to leap out at us. But there was nothing, just trees, shadows, and silence. He turned back to us, forcing a grin. "See? Just us and our imaginations." I felt a surge of relief, but then, just as Jake lowered the light, I heard it again. The crunch of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from behind him. Jake froze. He must have heard it too. We all did. Turning around slowly, he lifted the flashlight again, and this time, the beam landed on something, a figure standing just beyond the trees. I could barely make it out, but it was tall, dark, almost blending into the shadows, and it was staring right at us. It had these hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness, empty and chilling. Who are you?" Jake's voice was barely a whisper, trembling as he tried to speak. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring. And then, without warning, it took a step toward us. "Run!" someone shouted, but by the time I scrambled back, the figure was gone. Just vanished. Like it was never there. I felt my skin crawl, knowing it had been real, knowing it was watching us. Somehow, the hours passed, and we finally managed to relax as dawn started to break. We had survived the night, though sleep was out of the question. Still, we were all too eager to get out of those woods. We were almost packed up when Jake suddenly stopped, squinting down at something near the edge of the clearing. "Hey, what's this?" He bent down and picked up an old lantern covered in moss and dust. It looked ancient, like it had been out here for ages. "That wasn't there last night," I said, frowning. I would have noticed it for sure. But there it was, sitting just outside our campsite as if someone had left it for us. Jake turned it over in his hands, looking disturbed. I glanced over and noticed something on his arm. Dark smudges, handprints. There was one on his sleeve, one on his shoulder, and another faint mark on the back of his neck, almost like someone had gripped him in the night. "Jake," I said slowly, pointing at the marks. His eyes went wide as he noticed them too. A chill ran down my spine, and I took a step back, realizing what it meant. Whatever had been out there, it had been close. Close enough to touch him. Just then, we heard it again, the faint sound of footsteps shuffling through the trees, but this time, it wasn't just one figure. I turned, my heart pounding as I scanned the forest. Dozens of figures were emerging from the shadows, hazy and ghost-like. They looked almost human, but not quite. Hollow eyes, blank faces, their bodies melting into the mist as they moved toward us. "Run!" Jake shouted, and we bolted, crashing through the trees, barely able to think, just desperate to get away from them. I could hear footsteps all around me, louder and louder as the shadows closed in. When I glanced back, I saw Jake trip, falling to the ground. "Jake!" I yelled, skidding to a stop. I could see him struggling to get up, but something was wrong. There was a pale hand wrapped around his ankle, pulling him back, deeper into the shadows. His face was twisted in terror, and he was reaching out toward us. "Help me!" he screamed. But we were too far away. Before we could reach him, he was gone, pulled into the darkness, his screams fading into silence. We ran until we finally broke free of the trees, stumbling back into the morning light. But when we looked back, there was nothing, just the quiet, empty forest. Jake was gone. We never found him. People still say the forest is haunted. Some nights, campers see a figure lurking in the trees, a shadow with hollow eyes, and if you get too close, it leaves a cold, dark handprint on you, marking you,